Yates, I want to start with you. You declined to support, to defend President Trump's executive order because you thought it was unconstitutional. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. You don't like Donald Trump, do you?
I don't respect the manner in which he has carried out the presidency.
Okay. You despise Donald Trump, don't you?
No, I don't despise anyone, Senator.
I don't mean to wax too metaphysical.
And if I can say, I can understand why you might be a little frustrated with the language here.
I'm not frustrated. I'm happy as a clam.
No, and here's the reason. Let me give you a little idea of the timing.
Okay, but let me stop you because I don't have much time. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical here, but at what point does an act of Congress or an executive order become unconstitutional?
Well, it all depends on what the act does.
No, but I mean, at what point is it become? I can look at a statute and say, I think that's unconstitutional. Does that make it unconstitutional?
I think the issue that we faced at the Department of Justice is to defend this executive order would require lawyers to go in and argue that this has nothing to do with religion.
But at what point does a statute or an executive order become unconstitutional? Is it some a priori determination? It becomes, I mean, what I'm telling you what I'm getting at, and I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was appointed.
That determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
From the very beginning, Senator Kennedy doesn't challenge policy. He challenges objectivity. By repeatedly asking whether Sally Yates dislikes or despises President Trump, he forces the conversation into uncomfortable territory. Yates tries to separate personal opinion from professional responsibility, carefully choosing her words, but the repetition is intentional. Kennedy is drawing a line between legal judgment and personal sentiment. The moment subtly frames the entire hearing. Before debating constitutionality, the audience is asked to consider whether bias, even unconscious, could be shaping the decision to refuse defense of an executive order.
Ms. Yates, Dr. Clapper, thank you both for your years of service to the American people. Ms. Yates, I want to start with you. You declined to support, to defend President Trump's executive order because you thought it was unconstitutional. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And you believe that no reasonable argument could be made in its defense. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know that I would put it in that way, Senator. This was the analysis that we went through.
Okay. Let me stop you because I've got a whole bunch of questions.
Okay.
I just want to understand your thinking from my perspective.
Sure.
Did you believe then that there were reasonable arguments that could be made in its defense?
I believed that any argument that we would have to make in its defense would not be grounded in the truth.
This is where the hearing transitions from political theater into a constitutional pressure test. Kennedy asks a question that sounds simple but carries enormous weight. At what exact moment does a law become unconstitutional? Is it when an official believes it is, or when a court rules it so? Yates responds with discussion of intent, analysis, and legal standards, but the question keeps circling back unanswered. The longer the response becomes, the clearer Kennedy's point grows. Constitutional authority isn't based on interpretation alone. It's based on process. And that process doesn't start or end with personal conviction.
Because to make an argument in its defense, we would have to argue that the executive order had nothing to do with religion, that it was not done with an intent to discriminate against Muslims.
Okay.
And
so
based on a variety of factors.
You were looking at intent?
Yes, and I believe that that's the appropriate analysis. And in fact, that's been borne out in several court decisions since that time, that that's the appropriate analysis when you're doing a constitutional analysis. It's to look to see what are you trying to accomplish here.
Okay. Suppose instead of an executive order, this had been an act of Congress, would you have refused to defend it?
If it were the same, of Justice has done that in the past. For example, with DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, when the Department of Justice refused to defend DOMA.
But that was a political decision, was it not?
Well, I wasn't at Main Justice at that time, so I can't speak to that, but that was another example of when DOJ did not defend the constitutionality of a statute in that sense.
But in your opinion, the executive order is unconstitutional?
I certainly was not convinced that it was constitutional, and given that I wasn't, and the import of this, I couldn't in good conscience send Department of Justice lawyers in to defend it.
Well, I want to be sure I understand. Do you believe it's constitutional or unconstitutional?
I was not convinced that it was constitutional.
This is the turning point, not because of volume or drama, but because of precision. Kennedy calmly reminds the room that constitutional finality belongs to the judiciary, not to executive officials, no matter how experienced or sincere. By asking who appointed Yates to the Supreme Court, he crystallizes the issue into one unavoidable truth: belief does not equal authority. The reaction in the room, muted laughter, visible discomfort, shows the weight of the moment. In one sentence, the argument shifts from abstract theory to institutional reality.
I believed that it was unconstitutional in the sense that there was no way in the world I could send folks in there to argue something that we didn't believe to be the truth.
So you believe it's unconstitutional?
Yes.
Okay. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical.
And if I can say, I can understand why you might be a little frustrated with the language here.
I'm not frustrated. I'm happy as a clam.
No, and here's the reason. Let me give you a little idea of the timing.
Okay, but
of
let
this.
me stop you because I don't have much time. I don't mean to wax too metaphysical here, but at what point does an act of Congress or an executive order become unconstitutional?
Well, it all depends on what the act does.
No, but I mean, at what point is it become? I can look at a statute and say, I think that's unconstitutional. Does that make it unconstitutional?
I think the issue that we faced at the Department of Justice is to defend this executive order would require lawyers to go in and argue that this has nothing to do with religion.
But at what point does a statute or an executive order become unconstitutional? Is it some a priori determination? It becomes, I mean, what I'm telling you what I'm getting at, and I don't mean any disrespect. Who appointed you to the United States Supreme Court?
I was appointed.
That determined, isn't it a court of final jurisdiction decides what's constitutional and not? In fact, aren't most acts...
Here, the hearing exposes a deeper institutional dilemma. Yates explains that she refused to send Department of Justice lawyers into court to argue something she believed was not true, specifically that the executive order had no religious intent. Kennedy presses further, referencing past DOJ refusals like the Defense of Marriage Act. The exchange raises a powerful question. When does legal discretion become selective enforcement? This moment isn't about one president or one order. It's about how much authority unelected officials should have to decide which laws deserve defense.
Acts of Congress presumed to be constitutional?
They are presumed, but they're not always constitutional. And no, of course, I was not on the Supreme Court. And I can tell you, Senator, look, we really wrestled over this decision. I personally wrestled over this decision. Not one that I took lightly at all. But it was because I took my responsibilities seriously as acting Attorney General.
I believe you believe what you're saying.
Yes, I do.
I'm just trying to understand this is likely to come up in the future.
Well,
at what point does an executive order or statute become unconstitutional? When I think it's unconstitutional, or you think it's unconstitutional, or a court of final jurisdiction says it's unconstitutional?
I believe that it is the responsibility of the Attorney General. If the president asks him or her to do something that he or she believes is unlawful or unconstitutional, to say no. And that's what I did.
Okay, I get it. All right, let me ask you both a couple of questions. Can we agree, Director and Counselor, that the Russians attempted to influence the outcome of the election?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Yes.
Do you believe that the Russians did, in fact, influence the outcome of the election, Director?
In our intelligence community assessment, we made the point that we could not make that call. The intelligence community has neither the authority, the expertise, or the resources to make that judgment. The only thing we said was we saw no evidence of influencing voter tallies in any of the 50 states. But we were not in a position to judge.
Just when the hearing seems to be winding down, Kennedy shifts gears, and the contrast is immediate. His questions about Russian interference are direct, concise, and answerable. Yes, Russia attempted to interfere. No, there is no evidence they altered vote totals or the outcome. The simplicity of these answers stands in stark contrast to the earlier philosophical detours. The pivot reinforces Kennedy's core message. Law relies on evidence, authority, and clarity, not interpretation layered over interpretation. It's a controlled ending that leaves the audience with a clear framework for evaluating power and accountability.